Now what are we going to do?
I have to get another bulb, Mr. Carlson.
Where?
Well, I don't know. It can't be that difficult to find a small little projector bulb in Dayton at 7 o'clock in the evening. Hey, Mickey, you got any suggestions?
Ricky's.
Ricky's, Mickey?
Yeah.
Where's that, Mickey?
About 2 blocks east.
East is this way?
That way.
Thank you, Mickey.
Andy, don't leave now. Vicky Von Vicky could be here any second.
I gotta go, Mr. Carlson. Look, without a bulb, we have no presentation. Without a presentation, we got no client. Without a client, we got no...
Go.
I will, Mr. Carlson.
Andy, don't be long.
I won't, Mr. Carlson.
And another thing, Andy, be careful. Dayton can be nasty after dark.
Listen up, fellow babies. It's time for Hold My Order Terrible Dressing, the deep dive history nerd WKRP in Cincinnati podcast. I am Rob McDougall, and with me is Mike Grasso.
How's it going, everyone?
He is the DJ, I am the rapper, and we are back. We're working our way through the oddball first half of Season 3 of WKRP in Cincinnati, taking you back to, I'm guessing, November, December 1980.
Yes.
The 2 episodes we're looking at today, Hotel Oceanview and A Mile in My Shoes. Mm-hmm. So we're going to jump right into Hotel Oceanview. That name may or may not ring a bell, but this is a, I think, memorable, funny, and I think really strange episode of WKRP. Jamie Weinman, great WKRP fan Jamie Weinman, described this episode on his blog as one of the weirder episodes of this or any sitcom. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's a strange one. The plot involves Herb, Andy, and the big guy road trip up to Dayton to meet a client, to pitch a potential advertiser, I should say.
Yeah.
And while in Dayton, Herb hooks up or comes close to hooking up with someone who turns out to be an old high school buddy of his who has transitioned into being a woman.
Yeah.
And Mr. Carlson fears that he is going to be killed by the Dayton poisoner. and hijinks ensue.
Yeah, hijinks ensue, exactly. And I think that this episode, again, is, you know, when you say it's memorable, this is one of the ones I remember very, very vividly from childhood. Again, maybe not understanding all the implications of either plot, but there's just something about the Hotel Oceanview, apart from its name. It's a very Lynchian sort of set of sets, almost kind of noir in a way. It's kind of like noir meets David Lynch.
That's right. There's you don't get a lot of ocean views in Dayton, first of all. There's an establishing shot of Dayton after dark that is extremely noir. It's just a dark street with a neon sign. At one point, Arthur says to Andy, be careful, Andy. Dayton is nasty after dark. And this episode has we've talked about other episodes having dark tone, meaning depressing, but this episode has a dark tone. There's a serial killer on the loose.
Yes.
And there's even a way, like, we're going to get into it, the great scene with Arthur and the bartender Mickey, who he comes to believe might be the Dayton poisoner. I'm not going to say that it's scary, but Larry Hankin, who plays Mickey, has such a great intensity that there actually is a kind of weird suspense to that scene. What's going on with this guy? And then the lights go out and it's all dark. And yeah, every episode of this season has had a different tone.
Oh, yeah.
And this episode, I can't even quite put my finger on it, but it's pretty close to Lynchian for a sitcom.
So, when we talk about sort of like the way you described the big guy, Andy and Herb going off on this little mission, it made me think of like those away team episodes of Star Trek where the captain would go. We almost never see the big guy out of the office doing stuff like this. And it's kind of great to have him. When he interacts with other people, it's usually in his office, and he's kind of, he's amongst sort of all of his props and his sort of his comfortable set there. But seeing the big guy not only unmoored by the fact he might be killed by the Dayton poisoner, but also having to wear tight designer jeans is just a fantastic combination of circumstances. Gordon Jump just looks completely harried this entire episode, and it's great.
An away team episode. That's what this is.
Yeah.
What they needed, they should have brought one more character. They should have brought a red shirt with them. Like,
Bucky could have been the red shirt.
Bucky,
yeah, because we never see him again.
Who's
after.
the sort of sad sack DJ that you never see? The daytime DJ.
Moss Sterner in the afternoons. Yeah, they could have brought Moss with them.
And he would have gotten poisoned.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly.
Well, as you can see, these gentlemen are wearing Vicky Von Vicky jeans.
Yes, I see. How cute.
A little tight in the crotch, but
You know, Herb, we've met before.
Impossible. I never forget a face, especially one as lovely as yours.
Oh, you flatter me.
Thank you.
So once the three folks from WKRP arrive in Dayton, Andy is kind of nervous. It's a big account, so he's kind of flipping through all of his projector slides. He's doing it kind of twitchily, and he's a little bit nervous about this presentation he's about to give, and his bulb burns out.
That's not a euphemism.
No, it's not a euphemism. He's got to go find a projector bulb in Dayton at 7 p.m. on a Friday night, which that's a great sort of like... That's also very noir. He's going to go hit the hard streets of Dayton. That's when the big guy warns him about the streets of Dayton being dangerous after dark. This allows us to shuffle Gary Sandy and Andy off of the stage for a little while so that Frank Bonner and Gordon Jump can do the comedic heavy lifting in this episode. And as you mentioned, Herb's plot is that he is reunited with an old high school football buddy of his, Nikki, who is now a woman.
Yeah, he doesn't know, of course, at first that it's his old buddy. That's sort of, it's a slow reveal, although it's not a super slow reveal. At a certain point, Nikki just blurts it out after they've started making out.
Yes. You know, again, this is another in a long line of plots for Herb that, you know, this plot is just of a piece with the Less on a Ledge plot line where Johnny tries to trick Herb into thinking that Jennifer was also trans. And the plot line of Filthy Pictures where Herb has to go and try and seduce the pictures of Jennifer off of Gonzer. So, I mean, the writers really, really revel in putting the chauvinist Herb Tarlek into these situations where he has to get a taste of his own medicine. I think at one point even Nikki says something like, you know, am I too aggressive for you? And, you know, there's all these little bits of foreshadowing before the reveal happens. And, you know, it's one of these things where we know this is the angle that the writers take on Herb, where it starts to intersect with issues like gay issues and trans issues. There's this opposition that's being put up of making sure Herb kind of gets his just desserts in a way. And as far as 1980 goes, is that a progressive view of gay and trans characters? I don't know. They're all sort of mechanisms for Herb to feel humiliation.
Yeah, that's right. I think that what I feel like watching this episode is... certainly you're ready to cringe.
Yes.
You're ready to groan. And then it's kind of, it could have been worse is where I end up. You know,
I think
sort
so,
of like
yeah.
shrug and go like, yeah, well, okay, it could have been worse. Part of that is, of course, the great Frank Bonner, and that they understand that the funniest thing is his reactions.
Right.
And so it's his discomfort is the joke.
Mm-hmm.
But then, you know, yeah, they are playing this, oh, she used to be a man for shock value, no question.
Mm-hmm.
But Nikki actually gets, you know, to sort of explain her point of view and is not completely made into a freak by any means.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that for a guest character on a 24-minute sitcom, Linda Carlson, who plays Nikki, gets to really flesh out this character a little bit. She talks about how she was attracted to Herb in the locker room, which again is one of these classic sort of like gay panic. It's the same plot of Less on a Ledge. It's that thing we talked about way back in season 1 about, you know, straight men feeling threatened by somebody looking at them and objectifying them, you know, in the showers of the locker room. But Nikki like links it up with this idea that she knew that she also was in the wrong body at that point, which was pretty common parlance for how, you know, the transgender experience was explained back in the 70s and 80s. You know, I felt like I was born in the wrong body. And like her sincerity on that front is, I think it's a good sort of tonic and a balancing act to the fact that, yes, she is very attracted towards Herb. And yes, she is very aggressive towards Herb. And that kind of stereotype of a trans woman could dance along that edge of being offensive. But I feel like she's a three-dimensional character, again, given the limitations of being a guest on a sitcom.
First of all, I sort of call BS on her being a football player in high school.
She's taller than Frank Bonner, though, or she's in heels.
Yeah,
I mean,
maybe Nick could have been, sure. In a way, for me, the lead up to before the reveal is more squicky than after, because
I think so.
I'm just bothered by Herb's willingness to sleep with this woman, or it's not clear, he's not just trying to cheat on his wife, he's doing all this in order to get the account.
I think he got practice working on Gonzer. I think he's like, I can land any account, I can convince anyone just by using my sheer sex appeal. Would he have, quote, landed the deal with Nikki? I mean, this is the farthest we've ever seen him go with anyone who he's been, attracted to, and yeah, like the more interesting question to me, you're right, is would he have actually gone and cheated on Lucille if this reveal hadn't happened?
He's only got 10 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was gonna say. That great line where Andy and the big guy say, "You got 10 minutes." He's like, "Yeah, that should do it."
They go off to another suite.
Yes.
You get Lynchian, like it's a sort of dark hotel room. The detail I love is that to set the mood, he puts some money in a coin-operated clock radio.
Oh, that's great.
Which starts playing Herb Alpert.
Yes. And that could be WKRP on the radio, because it's one of these late Herb Alpert songs. It's Rise, and it's very quiet storm, sort of, smooth jazz. And it's like, I could picture Venus putting that on. He may have tuned into WKRP. But yeah, the coin-operated radio is great. It's like the cavalcade of things that used to be coin-operated in motel rooms, magic fingers and, radios. And I think about those coin-operated TVs and bus stations. You remember those?
Yeah.
Where you used to have to put in a coin and you could watch this tiny little 9-inch black and white TV right on the arm of the bus station seat.
Isn't this something? You and I together after all these years?
We've both certainly been through some changes.
You always turned me on.
Oh, man, don't say that.
Why not? It's true. I knew it when we played football together.
Don't bring up football.
I felt like a freak then, Herb. I was in the wrong body. But now I like me. I accept who I am.
Oh, Lord.
I know what you're thinking, Herb. You're thinking God didn't make me this way. Well, God didn't make polyesters. Do you know what I'm saying, Herb?
I know what you're saying. I have no idea what it means.
Of course, one thing that this episode and its treatment of Nikki makes me wonder is about PJ Tarakve.
Yeah, so this episode was written by Stephen Campman, but as we know, Stephen Campman and Tarakve were writing partners. Now, from what I've read in that great piece, and we'll link to it in the show notes, about PJ Tarakve's kind of life story, she didn't transition until after
years later, decades later.
Yeah. Could this have, we don't know, but could this have been, did Campman know? Did PJ confide in him? And was this plot? Now, the plot apparently was out of an old sketch that Campman had written.
Yes, a Second City sketch that just where he meets a woman who says, "Oh, I remember you from high school," and he's trying to remember how they know each other. And the joke, the reveal is that, oh, it used to be a dude.
Right.
It was Shelley Long, apparently, in the sketch with him.
Yeah, that's amazing. I didn't realize that she had done improv or worked at Second City.
Yeah,
at all.
me neither.
That's great.
Yeah.
But yeah, if they were writing together at Second City, could this have been? I don't know. It's an interesting question. It's all speculative, obviously, but again, as far as the level of sensitivity it dealt with, I think you're right. I think before the reveal, you feel kind of weird because there is this sort of Nikki comes off very predatory. After the reveal and we see Herb's comedic discomfort, Nikki gets to tell her side of the story. And like I said, I feel like that actually came across pretty well, especially pretty well for the time.
Yeah, and she keeps her cool. He freaks out. She keeps her cool. She's not upset or embarrassed afterwards. She just strolls right back into the meeting. And Nikki has, I think, a great line, particularly since she's talking to Herb. She says, "Now you might say, oh, God didn't make me this way, but God didn't make polyester."
I know that was, I actually laughed out loud at that line. And again, it's a little bit heavy. It's a little bit obvious, but it breaks the tension and it makes a good point. You know what I mean? And again, she can read Herb. She knows what kind of dude Herb is by looking at sort of how he's dressed and what she remembers from high school.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nikki as kind of like a example of a trans character on television in this era. I mean, they were definitely both, anybody on the LGBTQ spectrum was that these folks were starting to come out in a very literal sense on the airwaves at this point in television history.
Yeah, this is about the earliest time when you could have LGBT characters, really of any kind. Mm-hmm. The 70s, the early 80s. And I think that lots of portrayals at this time probably fell into the same box of kind of like basically well-meaning, but not above making it a joke.
Yes.
So, this sort of mixture of cringing and it could be worse.
Mm-hmm. When we saw this episode was coming up on the schedule, I immediately thought back to the TV series Soap.
Yes.
Because one of the characters in that series was the one played by Billy Crystal, Jody Dallas. As far as like well-meaning sort of depictions of LGBTQ characters on TV goes, I don't even know how well-meaning Jody was because, again, when you think about Soap, Soap is meant to be a outside satire of soap operas that were going on at the time. When you're dealing with a sensitive issue like this one at the time, it's kind of tough to figure out whether they were parodying the over-the-top plot lines of daytime and primetime soap operas at the time, or whether they were really trying to do right by the gay community. So basically, the story of Jody is that when we first meet him, he's definitely on the sort of T end of LGBT, and he's both cross-dressing and planning to transition because he wants to marry his closeted football player boyfriend.
Again with the football.
Yeah, I know. It's isn't that interesting? Yeah, now that I think about it, it stretches across Less on a Ledge into Hotel Oceanview and into Soap. This, you can't think of a better sort of example of a social milieu that would be threatened by either a gay or trans person in the locker room, like I said earlier. But I think that the gay community at the time was kind of at a loss because the writers and producers of Soap were conflating all of these different aspects of queer,
that's
queer
what
community.
Right. They seem to think that transgender and gay were the same thing, and they sort of shift that at first he wants to become a woman, and then as the show goes on, he's gay, and
then eventually he really almost becomes straight because all of the relationships that are featured on the show are with women, and then he has a child with this roommate that he had, and they soft soap, no pun intended, the entire sort of power of his plot line in the first season or two of Soap. And again, this is what I mean about like how long can you have a character in the late 1970s who's outside of the mainstream like that? Guest characters, sure, fine, but when you have a regular on the show, they are hard pressed to accurately or sensitively represent that person in episode after episode.
Well, Jody, so you're going to get married, huh?
Yeah, it looks that way.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
I guess that means you're not gay.
No, Aunt Jessica, it doesn't.
Jody, when we were younger, there was no such thing as homosexuals.
Yes, there were, Aunt Jessica. The homosexuals go way back in history.
Who?
Alexander the Great was gay. Plato was gay.
Plato? Mickey Mouse's dog was gay?
I think neither of us had heard of this little bit of TV history when we went looking into the history of transgender characters on television, came across this Norman Lear show from 1977 called All That Glitters. And for there to be a TV show that neither you nor I have heard of from the 1970s, that doesn't happen that often.
I think when we researched it, we kind of found out the reason why, because it's very much an oddball, both the concept and how long it lasted. I mean, it's definitely a footnote in Norman Lear's otherwise illustrious history of hits.
So this was a show. It debuted in April 1977, so it's a mid-late season replacement. But it was on 5 nights a week, like a soap opera, I guess.
Yeah.
But it only lasted something like 4 months or 3 months, 13 weeks before cancellation.
I think the model here was Mary Hartman, which we've talked about in past episodes.
Right. The premise is that this show was in like an alternate universe, an alternate history where women were the dominant sex.
Right.
And it was just a kind of mirror flipping. I think we talked about that back in the 70s hunks discussion.
Yeah.
About that the 70s way to be progressive was just to flip everything,
Yep.
or that was one to play around. So it was a flipped world where women were dominant, men were relegated to being sex objects and secretaries and house husbands, and crazy topsy-turvy, just flipping of the script. But it also happened to have, I guess, a bunch of other playing around with gender in it, including a transgender woman, a transgender character and so that's the first regular transgender character on a television series.
That series has a lot of interesting people in it. They Eileen Brennan from Private Benjamin, Gary Sandy was on it for a bit, and Jessica Walter, who we've talked about before. So I mean, I want to see this series. It sounds fascinating. I do like ham-handed sci-fi sort of takes on social issues, and this sounds like it sounds like one.
It's almost like the gender politics version of like Planet of the Apes or something like
that.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. I think the idea that we were getting at earlier is the reason why we haven't heard about this is because it really bombed.
Yeah.
Because people were just uncomfortable with. I mean, it wasn't one of Norman Lear's best shows, from what I can read from the contemporary reviews. But you have to wonder how much of those contemporary reviews was influenced by the fact that the actual conceit of the show was uncomfortable for male reviewers.
Oh, yeah. This mostly what this story says to me is, what a funny time the late 70s was, and what faith
We've never said that before, have we?
Well, no. And what faith they had, or what sort of clout Norman Lear must have had to be able to pull this off.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, not to pull it off, but be able to,
absolutely.
to get this green-lighted.
Oh, yeah. No, I agree with that, absolutely. And, I mean, this is sort of near the end of his sort of decade of, incredible, TV and culture-changing hits. If anybody's going to have the cachet to kind of pull this off, it would have been him in 1977.
Where's Herb? He should have been here by now.
Mind if I play a little music, Art?
No, please go ahead.
It's interesting music. I think I could do with about half a glass more of that fruity drink.
We're out of fruit, Art.
I'm sorry to hear that, Mickey.
How about a bamboozle, Art?
A bamboozle, Mickey?
Yeah, bamboozle, Art.
I don't think so, Mickey.
Well, what's wrong? Don't you like the way I make a bamboozle?
No, I think you make a nice bamboozle.
Nice?
Nice and nice? No, I mean, I think you make a great bamboozle. In fact, you probably make a bamboozle better than anybody I've ever seen make a bamboozle before. Yeah, I don't want to sound extreme, Mickey, but you probably make the best bamboozle in the world.
I like you, Art.
I like you, Mickey.
Mind if I have a drink?
Well, we had to start with Herb and Nicky, but for my money, the best part of this episode is the interplay between the big guy, Arthur, and the bartender, Mickey, as they wait. They sort of wait around for Vicky Von Vicky to show up, and there's this weirdly intense bartender who has this strange cryptic conversation, even right from when they start ordering drinks. I don't know what it is, but it's got fruit in it, Art. They have this cryptic conversation, and gradually Arthur begins to fear that he is in the clutches of the Dayton poisoner.
Oh, yeah, it's great. Well, first of all, there's so much great about the way they bring Mickey on. First of all, his name is Mickey, and one of the most famous bartenders in human history was Mickey Finn, who gave his name to the chloral hydrate drops that were used to steal and rifle through the pockets of the customers at his bar in Chicago in the aftermath of the H.H. Holmes Columbian Exposition. So the streets of Chicago were real dangerous around the turn of the last century as well.
That's right. It goes right back to Holmes and the Murder Castle. Yeah, somebody slipped me a Mickey.
And so, first of all, when you first hear his name, obviously the joke in this episode is that everybody's names rhyme. You've got Mickey, Nicky, and Vicky, and they get some good mileage out of that. Some good, sort of like the airplane cockpit scene where it's over, under, and done, and all that stuff.
Roger.
Roger,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. But yeah, the character of Mickey is, I think, the glue that holds this entire episode together. And the actor who we've kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, Larry Hankin, his chemistry with Gordon Jump is pretty fantastic. Gordon Jump does he's at Don Knotts levels of like being scared in this scene. Like he's got the eyes bugging out. He's got the the stammering down pat, and he is absolutely convinced that he is in the clutches of the Dayton Poisoner.
Well, I'm on record more than once on this podcast as saying that I don't find it funny when someone does the bugging of the eyes and the humming.
Yes.
Andy being afraid, Johnny being afraid, but this one completely works for me. And I guess the two reasons are the magnificence of Gordon Jump, first of all.
Yes.
And then Larry Hankin, Mickey the bartender, he is a lot more genuinely scary than Hoyt Axton or
the Reverend Little Ed.
Reverend Little Ed. Yeah, because he's got this weird intensity.
He's got the intensity. It's the look. It's his face is kind of cadaverous. I mean, but he's also dressed in that bartender meets real estate agent kind of blazer.
The yellow blazer, like Howard Cosell or something.
Oh my God, how Lynchian is that? Reminds me of the dead man in yellow in the final scene of Blue Velvet, right? Standing in the middle of the room, having been shot and still standing up. I mean, yeah, Larry Hankin's great. When you listed all of the parts that he's had, and he's had tons of parts, and he's had a great comedy history.
Oh yeah.
But the one that I think that everybody who's listening to this needs to know. Do you guys remember the season of Seinfeld where George and Jerry are doing the pilot and they get the Kramer who's acting as Kramer?
Right.
That's Larry Hankin.
Right. The guy that plays the guy who's going to play Kramer on the series, the ersatz Kramer.
The one who steals the raisins.
I think his name is Tom Pepper, and he's awesome because he's like where the real Kramer is, sort of goofy and lovable. He's menacing. He's got this sort of ferocious.
But he's just as goofy looking.
Yeah.
And again, it's kind of like a clone of him. Yeah, so he pulled that off great. And in this episode, he pulls off that mix of goofy and intense really, really well. And it should be no surprise, we've said it before, when there's a guest star who knocks it out of the park, they are a friend of Howard Hesseman's.
Yes, where did this guy come from? You will not be surprised if you've been listening to this podcast that Hankin was a member of the committee. In fact, he was one of the founding members of the committee.
Yeah.
He was in Second City back in the early 60s, trained with Viola Spolin, who we talked about back when talking about Edie McClurg, the sort of creator of improv in America. But then he left Second City for San Francisco way back in 1963.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw that story I linked to, the little piece. There's some great details in there.
We'll definitely link to that in the show notes. It's fantastic.
Right. Talking about, how it was such a great education to work with Spolin, but she was also really tough. She was, whenever they were trying to do a story, she's always on the side saying, are you listening? Are you thinking? And she didn't like it when they swore.
Oh.
And so, the other story I like is, these early days of improv comedy in 1963, where they, get people to shout out current events and news and that sort of thing, talking about their first show back after the Kennedy assassination. And everyone is reeling from the death of Jack Kennedy. And they say, almost cringing, they're like, okay, someone give us a, topic to improvise about. And there's like dead silence in the theater. And they sit there waiting. And then somebody shouts out, San Francisco coffee really sucks. and at first there's like this sort of wave of relief. And then Larry Hankin stands up and says, really? Somebody just shot the president, and then that guy got shot too. And you want us to do a sketch about coffee? And then they went ahead and did the sketch about coffee, I think. But just
I can see him confronting the audience angrily too. That totally fits in with what we've seen of him in all of these different parts we're talking about.
Right.
Larry Hankin will take no shit from anyone in his roles. He will basically, like, his stock character is the I'm going to intimidate you with my intensity, and I am not going to take any of your bullshit, essentially.
That's right. He, just to run down some of the list, he was on Star Trek a couple of times. He was in a string of the John Hughes movies. He was Mr. Heckles on Friends. I think he was like their mean neighbor.
Oh yeah.
Jeez. And then he was on Breaking Bad as the old Tom, the guy that ran the junkyard.
Yeah. When I opened up that article, I saw his face again. That's the thing. He does kind of meld into his roles a little bit. He's got the same face, but I tell you something, it's something about either the way that he's changed over the years, or his hair, or just the way he comes across. Like, it's him. He's not that guy in the traditional sense. He's sort of like, you have to kind of puzzle out the fact that this is the same dude who was in, Seinfeld and Friends.
I'm struck by how sort of ageless he is. Like, not that he seems young, but that he sort of seems like he's been a kind of slightly shabby, disheveled, late middle age since the 70s and still is.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that. Yeah, he's one of those guys who gets to 50 at 20 and just never ages after that.
Yeah. But no, so the two of them together are terrific. And like I say, that goes a long way to setting the tone of this episode. As I said,
yes.
It's not scary, but there is this weird, skittish intensity to it that actually makes that bug-eyed humana thing really, really funny.
You know what I don't like, Art?
What's that?
I don't like drinking alone. Because when I drink alone, I get very sad. When I get sad, I get very angry. You sure you don't want to drink?
Oh, I'd love one.
That's very funny, because I didn't want one before.
Yeah, well, you see, that was
53 seconds ago. Do you mind if we chat a while?
I wish we would. No. In fact, chatting's almost become a hobby with me.
What do you think about the Dayton poisoning?
Dayton poisoning?
Yeah.
The writers do a really good job in fleshing out the universe that involves the strange Dayton, the Lynchian Dayton that includes the Dayton poisoner. And especially when Arthur has finally broken and he's just like, he just does not want to die at the hands of this man playing, Bach off of a portable cassette player. These imposing organ chords coming from this little portable player.
Yeah, we have the coin-operated clock radio, and then we have the little portable tape player. Just the sort of the media which produces the music. In both cases, hugely evocative music. Mickey says, "Mind if I play a little music?" And then plays this very creepy Bach piece out of his little tape recorder.
Yeah, sort of the classic toccata and fugue in D minor. This connotes horror. This connotes something scary.
Yep.
But as he's going through this, and as we're kind of like, we're seeing Art recoil in fear. There's all these little bits that are dropped. Like I said, Mickey says that he's been following the case, and Arthur offers Herb's Cordoba to him so he can make a clean getaway.
Yep.
And all of these are like little elements of what was starting to come out at this point in 1980. This was really the golden age of the American serial killer.
Uh-huh.
These elements that I just talked about, the serial killer following his own press clippings, the victim trying to give the car over to the prospective killer, which happened in the Zodiac case. I have to imagine that since serial killers were so prominent in pop culture at this time and really starting to emerge from cases like Ted Bundy and John Wayne Gacy, all of these late 70s serial killers, there was no better time to have a serial killer plot than in this year of 1980.
No better time than to make comedy out of serial killers. Now, I'm not sure they ever used the phrase serial killer.
No. And a poisoner is not your traditional late 70s, you know what I mean, serial killer. But,
no.
If he's killing people in a series and he's not only nationwide famous, but also world famous, as Mickey says, you're talking about a pop culture phenomenon.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think that in a way it's like everything else in WKRP, if it makes sense to say that it's sort of like a local, small town, sort of slightly homely version of the serial killer. It's not the Son of Sam, it's the Dayton poisoner. Like it's just a little bit sort of B-list.
Yes. No, that totally makes sense. And it is very, very homely and again, kind of contained within the boundaries of Dayton. Now, when I hear Dayton poisoner, I think of other like famous Ohio serial killers. Boy, I'm really showing my serial killer obsession in this episode. But there was the Cleveland Torso Killer in the 1930s.
Way back in the 30s, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean that one, they named that person after the city and how he killed his victims, basically. So I wonder if Campman or somebody else on the writing staff was one of these people who followed true crime and sort of tabloid serial killers at the time. I mean, one of the most famous fictional serial killers of all time, Hannibal Lecter, was just about to be born in 1981's Red Dragon by Thomas Harris, which I've talked about Thomas Harris in previous podcasts, but like he had his finger on sort of the pulse of what was scaring the nation at this time. And what was scaring the nation was people in your neighborhood who looked normal, but were actually had, dozens of bodies buried under their house, or went out and strangled co-eds, or sent cryptic letters to the police and the newspapers.
Doesn't Mickey say that the Dayton poisoner writes to the police in verse?
Is that right? I didn't remember that.
I believe that's what he says. Yeah. So
there's lots of little details in that scene between Arthur and Mickey. Like, how much of that was improv, do you think? I mean,
good question.
Could Gordon Jump hang with someone from the committee on that level and kind of give back? I mean, maybe it was Larry Hankin himself kind of filling in all these great serial killer-like details.
Yeah, that's quite possible.
I want you to help me, Dr. Lecter.
I thought so.
It's about Atlanta and Birmingham.
Yes?
You read about it?
In the papers. I don't tear out the articles. I wouldn't want them to think I was dwelling on anything morbid. You want to know how he's choosing them, don't you?
I thought you might have some ideas.
Why should I tell you?
You get to see the file on this case. And there's another reason.
Pray tell.
Thought you might be curious to see if you're smarter than the person I'm looking for.
Then by implication, you think you're smarter than me since you caught me.
No. I know that I'm not smarter than you.
Then how did you catch me?
You had disadvantages.
What disadvantages?
You're insane.
Boy, this episode is jam-packed because we've been talking all this time and we haven't even gotten to our third guest star of the episode and the third sort of cultural aspect of it. The reason our friends are in Dayton is to try and sell ad space to Vicky Von Vicky designer jeans. And
what a great name. Oh my God. It's so fantastic.
It is so right. And so their jeans have those, those great high-waisted 80s dark designer jeans with the white V's on the rear pocket.
Yeah.
And boy, oh boy, this episode, we've had episodes that were concentrated late 70s. This episode is concentrated 1980.
Oh, yeah.
The trans thing, the serial killer thing, and then designer jeans. And who should play, in an episode that's already jam-packed with random stuff, who should play jeans magnate Vicky Von Vicky, but 1980s TV personality Dr. Joyce Brothers.
So this is one of those things where this kind of cameo could be considered stunt casting. And you're probably wondering to yourself, those of you who are like millennials, like, wait a minute, stunt casting, Dr. Joyce Brothers, who is that?
It doesn't seem like a stunt.
But you have to understand something. Joyce Brothers was on every talk show on. She had shows of her own, and she called herself America's first sort of like popular TV psychologist.
Yeah. Every talk show, every sort of interview show, but also, if you look at her IMDb page, she was also on pretty much every sitcom, often as herself.
Right.
So like Joyce Brothers lives in this metafictional sitcom world too. But in this episode of WKRP, she's not playing Dr. Joyce Brothers. She's playing Vicky Von Vicky. And why she's playing Vicky Von Vicky, I couldn't tell you except for, kind of her ubiquity at this time.
She does a really great job with a very little bit of screen time. And she comes across as kind of like somebody who would fly into Dayton from far away to, have to do a deal like this and then fly out immediately afterwards. She puts forth this sort of like image of a very urbane sophistication.
Yeah, it occurs to me that this episode has, these two strong women.
Yeah.
Her and Nikki, and then, the men kind of rolling around on the floor in the dark.
Yeah, that is a great line. And she, she's decent at kind of the comedic timing that's required when you have that lights out sketch and then you turn the lights on and all three of the guys from WKRP have their hands up and they're on their knees.
So do we want to talk about Dr. Joyce Brothers or designer jeans?
Well, I think the only thing I also want to say about Dr. Joyce Brothers is that, Rob, if you remember, you put a link up on our Facebook a few months ago about Dr. Joyce Brothers and her link with Dungeons and Dragons. Do you remember that?
Oh shit, I almost forgot that.
Well, I think we were talking about how she tried to explain like the alignment system.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So she's saying that D&D can teach people the difference between good and evil, and that's psychologically, that's very valuable stuff. So
I mean, this is her career. Is that Joyce Brothers kind of was like, she was America's psychologist or psychiatrist. She was Dr. Phil before Dr. Phil. She was Dr. Laura without the she was Dr. Laura without being Dr. Laura. And she was kind of game for anything, right? She was game to talk about anything. The famous story, how she got her start,
yes,
is that she was a contestant on $64,000 Question, the classic 50s game show. In fact, the game show which triggered the quiz show scandals.
You didn't buy this house. You wanted on a crooked 50s game show.
And I think that she became famous by winning the game. I think she might have been the first female contestant to win the game. And she won with a string of questions about boxing.
Yeah, it was one of those game shows where you got to pick your specialty subject. She decided, because she had like an eidetic memory, basically. She just decided to pick a subject she knew nothing about and just purely memorize facts and figures before going on the show. And she knew nothing about boxing before doing this show. And what's kind of cute is afterwards, after she was quote-unquote cleared of any involvement in these scandals, she actually got invited. One of her first television appearances outside the game show was that she was invited to be a ringside commentator during one of the boxing championship fights in the late 50s. And she was one of the first female sports broadcasters for that special guest appearance.
Gygax, a religious man himself, was put on the defensive. The company hired psychologist Dr. Joyce Brothers to fend off criticism.
There is good and evil in life, and the way Dungeons and Dragons is set up is that good triumphs over evil.
So designer jeans, this is another thing that I remember, again, very, very faintly from childhood, this trend, this tendency. You talked about the styling, they're darker, they've got more stitching. As the big guy says, they're a little tight in the crotch, but, that's all right. But again, the idea was that you were paying for the name on the jeans. You were paying for the label. You were paying for the impresario who happened to stamp their name on the back of these jeans. So there's a great article we'll link to in the show notes about sort of how this all came about. And, the big names were Gloria Vanderbilt, who I think Vicky Von Vicky is meant to kind of evoke.
Right.
But then the bad boy of the designer jeans scene was Calvin Klein.
That's right. Yeah. So just backing up a little bit.
Yes.
Today, in a world of designer T-shirts, designer everything, we don't recognize how, to people in the 1970s, like just the phrase designer jeans sounded like an oxymoron.
Right.
Like it sounded like that was a contradiction in terms. Mm-hmm. That jeans were the most sort of humble blue collar and then kind of hippie uniform, the dungarees. And they're not really design. Levi Strauss riveted some canvas together in 1886, and that's basically they stayed the same for the next 100 years.
Yeah.
So designer jeans, the idea that you would pay twice as much, 3 times as much for jeans that were styled in a certain way and had a designer name and of course a designer label stitched on the back. That was new. In the 1970s and early 1980s, and I guess they never went away, but they were huge for a couple of years there.
When you think about it, it's kind of a genius idea. For a class I took last semester, I read a book written by a couple of sociologists called Blue Jeans, The Art of the Ordinary. And it's basically it's a large form survey taken in North London back in the early aughts, where they just talk to people about why they wear jeans, and the authors kind of spin out all of these class and race observations on the kinds of jeans people wear. The idea that you're right, like something that was probably their work clothes, they're meant to handle sort of rough conditions, they're meant to be genderless, sexless, kind of, as you say, uniform for miners out west and railway workers and stuff like that. And it became, like you're saying, with the rise of the dungarees in the 60s, they became a symbol of rebellion, and American rebellion specifically. And the idea that 10 years after the sort of late 1960s, they could be co-opted by designer labels and, as you say, made 3 times more expensive and turned into these kind of status symbols is really interesting. And again, it's one of those little creeping bits of the 1980s that's starting to creep into WKRP and what they reflect about the culture.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the classic 80s, cusp of the 70s, 80s designer jeans, they'd be really tight.
Yes.
They'd be this dark blue denim. They'd be, by our standards, very high-waisted. Mm-hmm. And then they'd have sort of an elaborate stitching of the design of the label on the back. Because if you're going to pay an outrageous $30 for a pair of jeans, you're going to want people to know that that these are Jordache or Sassoon or Valente and I want to get back to the big two, as you said, were kind of, I think the first one was Gloria Vanderbilt.
Yes.
She kind of blew open this market. And then the bad boy, great way to put it, the number two brand is Calvin Klein. And in 1980, of course, the number two guy has to try harder, has to be a little bit more edgy and daring. And of course, the very famous TV campaign right in this period, same year as this episode, 1980, was the Calvin Klein TV ads featuring, she must have been like 15 years old, the model Brooke Shields.
Yeah, I mean, she was incredibly hot at this point. She'd just done Pretty Baby. She was about to do Blue Lagoon. She was all over the place. This was a little earlier than her dating Michael Jackson, if I remember correctly. But she, Brooke Shields is a huge figure in this year of 1980. Picking her, the kind of Calvin Klein sleazy underage appeal that he's done time and time again in his advertising campaigns. This is where it all started.
You want to know what comes between me and my Calvins? Nothing.
Calvin Klein jeans.
So some other designer jeans references in the pop culture. So I remember this weird movie from 1981 called So Fine. Do you remember this movie?
I've never seen it, but it is such a strange... I've heard of it because it's kind of infamously strange.
Yeah, it's an Italian ripoff style movie, but it's got real actors in it. Ryan O'Neal and Jack Warden, two of the biggest actors of the 70s. And it's this multi-generational garment business / sex farce / satire of designer jeans. And I guess the whole plot revolves around the fact that they develop a style of jeans after Ryan O'Neal's pair rips in the rear. They develop a style of jeans that has a transparent window in the back. So basically it's an outsized satire of the idea that these jeans are painted on and skin tight. People, even back in 1980, were like, oh, what's the next step? Are we just going to show our asses to everyone when we walk down the street? And that's what this movie did. It's a very bizarre movie, but it goes to show you exactly how much people thought about the designer jean as kind of like something new, different, unusual, and worthy of satire, I guess.
Yeah, that there could be a whole movie just about weird jeans. Yeah. And as soon as you have designer jeans, that moves jeans into fashion.
Yes.
Which means that jeans are going to change with the times. And we have this product which had basically gone unchanged, as we said, since the 1880s, now is like cars. It's got to be updated every year, and it's going to look different every year. And the imperative to render last year's jeans obsolete is going to lead jeans into a lot of goofy places over the next several decades. So like very often, if you look at a period in the past, in the last 30 years, often the stupidest thing about that period is the jeans.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, didn't we talk about that in Fish Story, where we saw some kids hanging on to some very, very large bell-bottom jeans in the university bathroom scene with the fish and the pig?
Yes, of course, bell-bottom jeans. But, for almost any decade, you watch...
Acid Wash, of course.
You watch Seinfeld, you see the jeans he's wearing in the early 90s, or you see, what were those super baggy jeans from the late 90s?
Oh, sure, yeah. Like, I would just call them baggy jeans, yeah. I've been thinking back to, also people love to make fun of, jorts and, jean shorts
right.
and cutoffs.
Shorts, janks, jeggings today,
Oh, yeah, sure. We're going to laugh at those in 10 years.
Those aren't going to look dumb in 5 years. No, sir. You got your mom jeans, your dad jeans. Do you remember Normcore a few years ago?
Yeah, Normcore's still going strong, Rob. Yeah.
Normcore's still going strong, yeah. That's a whole other topic, probably. But because jeans change so fast, they get stupid really fast.
Absolutely. Hey, Rob, you know another way this episode is so perfectly 1980?
What's that?
Well, when we get to the end of the episode and we have our usual typical, let's bring all the threads back together in the lobby of WKRP, Jennifer's getting up from her desk, and right before Andy and the big guy and Herb come back in, she turns up the volume, and damn well she should turn up the volume, because Johnny in the Morning is playing Sailing by Christopher Cross. Now listen, you were very kind to indulge me in my Billy Joel obsession last season in a couple of episodes. We do have to talk about Christopher Cross because in December of 1980, when this episode aired, he was on the verge of becoming one of the biggest Grammy winners of all time. All time. In a single year, he won Record, Album, and Song of the Year, and Best New Artist at the 1981 Grammys.
Yeah, and this song, Sailing, was a huge, huge song.
Oh, yeah.
Just to give you a sense of what kind of song it is, if somehow you don't know it, VH1 named this the greatest soft-sational soft rock song of all time.
Soft-sational. Wow, that is a portmanteau that I never want to hear again if I can avoid it in my life. But I mean, yeah, like this was the annus mirabilis for Chris Geppert, aka Christopher Cross, because at the end of 1981, he had another huge hit in Arthur's Theme, parentheses, Best That You Can Do, which again was another huge, huge hit. So this episode, right on the what's happening and what's trendy at the end of 1980, Christopher Cross being played while he's a number one hit.
Nice. I see here on Wikipedia that he also wrote the official song for the 1984 Summer Olympic Games, A Chance for Heaven. I think that probably his star was dimming by 1984, but he got that gig.
I hate to say it, I feel like his music got better and better throughout the 80s. I'm probably one of the outliers on that. As I recently went on a kind of yacht rock themed LP vinyl binge, I was so thrilled to see the Christopher Cross self-titled debut album in one of the bargain bins at a local store, local thrift store, because that album with the flamingo on the cover, man, you cannot get 9 better songs than the nine tracks on that album.
You are a smooth rocker. You yourself are soft-sational, Mike. What can I say?
Thank you. I will wear that with pride until the next time I hear that word, which will probably be never, but that's okay.
You will be soft rock by though it may take some time, I know eventually you will be soft rock by me. I use a passive voice to show how gentle I'll be when I soft rock you. You will know it's true that you've never been soft rocked till you've been soft rocked by me.
Well, our second episode today is called Mile in My Shoes, and the plot line of this one is that Herb has been called for jury duty, and he comes into the big guy's office at the beginning of the episode looking to get out of jury duty by saying he is essential to the running of the station, which, of course, the big guy and Andy laugh at. So Andy says, I'll take over sales while you're on jury duty, and Venus, who's been the associate program director since the events of Venus Rising, can fill in as program director. And so the mileage, no pun intended, comedically of this episode is seeing people having to deal with jobs that aren't theirs. Most prominently Andy, who slowly but surely over the course of this episode metamorphoses into kind of a parallel clone of Herb. Rob, what did you think of Mile in My Shoes?
Well, I think that, let's see.
It's okay. We don't have to say anything nice about it if we don't want to. This isn't if you're not going to say anything nice, don't say anything at all situation.
This is now, we mentioned this in the last couple of episodes. This is the first episode of the season that really returns more or less to the radio station as its setting. And, I was really hungry for that. Get back to the main storylines, get back to the main characters.
Yeah.
And I think that Everybody Plays Switcheroo, musical chairs, is a great premise for an episode. It's kind of a classic sort of sitcom premise.
Yes. I think of the Brady Bunch episode where Mike and Carol swap mom and dad duties, and neither of them can handle the other's job.
Yeah. So, that could have been great. Andy sort of like becoming Herb. There's a ton of potential there.
Yeah.
I wish that they had sort of played that out more, had played out the other possibilities. Yes. I wanted to see more of Venus becoming Andy.
Yes.
There's a lot of potential, but then there are a couple of, I think, just bad choices. One is the jury duty. We get like about a third of this episode is Herb on jury duty, and that seems like another sitcom.
Oh, yeah.
Some really, I think, weak guest star work.
Yes. As good as Hotel Oceanview was, as far as guest stars goes, this one is diametrically opposite.
And then, we're going to get to it, but there is a kind of steaming turd at the end of this episode, hauled up out of America's id that I don't even know how to talk about it. I'm trying not to, hold the fact that this was made in 1980 against it. But I think something that even for 1980 was just really, really ill-advised. And that is there's a Black Like Me kind of subplot with Les that ends in 10 seconds of full-on old-time blackface.
Yep. Yeah. There's lots of ways this episode doesn't work, Rob, and I'm in agreement with you. I mean, yeah, nothing in this episode worked for me from start to finish. The things that we're going to talk about that maybe were interesting also are kind of fraught with difficulties. So we'll do our best.
You haven't listened to me in 4 days, man.
Well, you haven't made any sense in 4 days.
I'm just doing my job.
Oh, I thought you were trying to do Andy's job.
Look, Fever.
You used to be a good disc jockey, man. Of course, that's when you were black.
And so I think, the best parts of the episode are the ones that stick to that question of what happens when we put each person in the other people's roles.
Yes.
And so Andy says, both Arthur and Andy kind of laugh almost cruelly at the suggestion that Herb is really necessary to the running of the station. And, so Andy, with a lot of enthusiasm, takes on the sales job. But what happens is that, Andy finds it harder than he expected to make sales, to get people to pay up. And, he ends up getting hoodwinked by one of Herb's sleazy clients.
Yeah.
And as all this is going on, we see this kind of gradual transformation of Andy into a kind of Herb.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty well done because there are just, again, hints of it in the early acts. And then by the end of the episode, he doesn't go full polyester, but he does turn into this like weird proto-yuppie kind of slicked back Gordon Gekko, Patrick Bateman hair. And
exactly. That's what I thought, is that he looks like Christian Bale in American Psycho at the end. By the time when he's in the sort of the fancy suit with his hair slicked back. Yeah, he's like full on 80s, salesman serial killer. I kind of want to see the alternate. I'm not sure when American Psycho was written, but if the movie had come out in 1983 with Gary Sanders.
I mean, and there are hints, like I said, like you can hear like an okay fine slip out of Andy's mouth on the phone in an earlier scene. So it's very kind of cutely done. He also gets into what Herb does at his own desk when he's bored and just kind of starts, building towers out of pencils and like fiddling around with all the stuff on his desk. So I like that. I like the idea that Andy kind of realizes that Herb actually has a way with these sleazy clients. Like he can deal with them on the sleazy level. You know what I mean? And like, be able to see that they're trying to con him because Herb himself is a con artist and the son of a con artist.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So the implication of this episode by the end is maybe not that Herb is kind of uniquely incompetent at his job, but that he's actually sort of suited for it. Not that he's great at it, but that, that's a kind of revision of our take on Herb. And I think it's of a piece with what Campman and Tarakve in this season basically make Herb the star of this show.
Yeah, it definitely is the Herb show by this point.
Come on in here, stranger. This is the place.
You're smiling out, I can tell. I'm Andy Travis. We talked on the phone there.
Sure did. This shows you how wrong a body can be. You didn't tell me you was a cowboy.
Oh, I'm not a real cowboy.
Oh, where you hail from?
Originally from Phoenix.
Phoenix, Arizona.
Are you from there?
No, I visited there one time. Drop your saddle side here and let's see whose brand's on them cattle.
So, as I mentioned, Andy has to deal with Smiling Al, who is the outsized Texan guy stereotype, like from that Simpsons character that's always wearing the 10-gallon hat and the white suit.
Yeah, rootin' tootin' stereotype. He's kind of...
Yeah, it's not... I said in the notes, the scene with Andy and Smile, as they call him, just falls deader than dead. There's no comedic juice there. There's no chemistry. I mean, you could have gotten some mileage out of Andy wearing the cowboy hat to the meeting, trying to ingratiate himself, but it just falls flat. The entire scene, it goes on. That scene just dragged endlessly, in my view, and it's at the center of the episode, like literally at the center of the episode, but it lasts like 4 minutes, and it's not funny.
Yeah, it seems like pretty much any time, every businessman who appears on WKRP they all look like big professional wrestlers and talk like Yosemite Sam. Maybe that's, Hugh Wilson's memory of the guys he worked with in Atlanta. But Smiling Al, as broad and overdone as he is not even the most obvious or overdone stereotype in this episode. Another contender for that turns up in the jury duty scenes, which also, I think, go on way too long and don't work for me. Yeah. Herb is at jury duty, and there's a handful of stock comedic characters, but really Herb's main foil on the jury is this old guy.
It's Walter Janovitz.
Walter Janovitz. Okay, and he's just
a little old man from another country. Rob.
Right. That Walter Janovitz is the actor's name. The character has no name other than old immigrant man. And it's such a broad, overdone immigrant, old European stereotype that he even lampshades it at one point by saying, "I'm just an old man from some other country that is not this one," and like they haven't even gone to the trouble of pinning that down.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, since we can't seem to agree on this, I'll make the decision.
That's not fair.
Fair's got nothing to do with it. I'm hungry. Now, that's 3 large pizzas, 2 with everything, 1 plain, and 1 spinach salad.
I get heartburns. What can I tell you? Couldn't we have Chinese food again? A good salad is very healthy, but please don't listen to me. I'm just an old little man from another country.
So, geez, where do we go from here as far as the comedy that doesn't work in this episode? I guess we can only go to one place.
Yeah, exactly. Because as I said, if Smiling Al and
Old Immigrant Man,
Smiling Al and Old Immigrant Man number 2 are competing to be the most overdone or obnoxious stereotype in this episode, locked in battle, at the very last minute, Les swoops in and steals that award from them. No contest with his little blackface routine.
So the setup for this is that Les is taking advantage of the fact that Andy's out of position as the sales guy to propose that he do a heartfelt look at the American Negro, quote unquote. And this would involve him emulating the sort of classic pop sociological study from the early 60s, Black Like Me. He says, Black Like Me's never been done on the radio. Like, that right there is actually a funny line because you can't see anyone on radio.
Yeah.
But Les tries to get this sort of proposed special series while Andy is distracted with all this sales stuff. Andy says, go talk to Venus. And so that leads to the inevitable, again, I think you said this in Young Master Carlson, what a fucking treat for Tim Reed to have to deal with this plot line.
Yeah.
Basically has to ask Venus and try to make friends with Venus while wearing blackface. It's horrible. It doesn't work.
We talked before that often KRP's line with this stuff is to make the joke, the unease or the awkwardness with which the white people, the unease with which Herb deals with a trans person, the awkwardness with which white people deal with race. And I think we've talked about how that's a bit of a cop-out.
Yeah.
But for the first 20 minutes of the episode, you could say, okay, that's the joke, is Les's cluelessness.
Yes.
But when they actually close on him in full blackface with an afro wig, the joke is simply how funny he looks. And that at that point, they have completely crossed the Rubicon from the joke being, isn't this absurd that Les would try to do this, to this is a minstrel show.
Yeah. Yeah. And, this stuff was still in the culture in 1980. There was still a belief among some of the white population in America that this could be a source of humor. Again, maybe not even on the level of irony, oh, look how backward Les is that he doesn't realize this is offensive.
Have you ever heard about the reporter who dyed his skin dark and went to live with black people?
I'm on the phone here, Les.
I have. It's called Black Like Me. It's a great book.
And you know what? It's never been done on radio.
Oh, Les.
I want to go out among the black people. Along the highways and byways. In the cafes. Laughing, loving, crying, and singing. Living the life of the Negro. And reporting it all in a series of award-winning news specials. What do you say?
Sounds great to me, Les. I'd say go ahead and do it. But see, I'm in sales while Herb's gone. You're going to have to talk to Venus about that.
I want to talk a little bit about Black Like Me,
Yes.
which is not technically blackface, or at least that's a question. And then we'll get into blackface. It lies underneath the surface of so much of American popular culture.
Yes.
It's a huge topic that we're not going to do justice to today. But Black Like Me is named James Howard Griffin.
John Howard Griffin. Yep.
The book came out in 1961. I think he actually did the experiment in like 1959. So this is pre-civil rights America.
Yeah.
And this white writer, Griffin, he didn't dye his skin. He didn't cork up like a blackface minstrel. He took some kind of melanin pills or something like that. I don't think he actually was ever super convincing, but that's part of the story, is that it didn't take much. Once he sort of posed as a black man, people accepted him as a black man very quickly. And
you're dealing with, again, rules, Jim Crow rules that were one drop. So, you did not need to, as you say, black up to be considered black by people in the South in the 1950s.
Right. So he then traveled through the South and experienced life, had people take him for black and experience what life was like that way, and then wrote a book about it. And the book was a phenomenon. Looking at this now, it's this funny question, because the book was a phenomenon, I think, because it seemed like a revelation to people of how hard it was to be black.
Yeah.
And it was really powerful for white audiences to read his description of the treatment he faced. But there's something funny about that. I think it was completely well-meaning.
Yes.
And I think actually I read the book years ago, and what I remember is the sort of powerful passages where he talks about his own racism and sort of tries to come to terms with it. So, I think that the book is about as sort of progressive and well-meaning as a white liberal could come up with in 1959. But
again, at the end of the experiment, Rob, he just doesn't take the pills and doesn't tan, and he can go back to his life.
Well, sure. So there's a way in which he is a tourist, and he's not really experiencing the life of an African American because he can stop at any time.
Yeah.
But also, what does it say that white America needed a white man to come along and say, hey, they're not lying when they say how bad it is. The so-called revelation was that that racism really sucks, and like white people didn't believe it until they heard it from a white man.
It's that classic thing of you don't really believe in the plight of other people until it happens to you or someone close to you. I've heard a lot of this come out of people talking about how pernicious rape culture is in America. People just ignore it until it happens to someone they know or it happens to themselves. It's the classic idea of that, when you don't have empathy, you cannot understand what other people are going through. At this time in American history, and I would argue even still today, people don't have empathy and they don't understand what other people are going through. And it happens on all levels: gender, race, class, everything.
It's just so sad that as you say, the lack of empathy, that this could be a revelation, and that people needed to hear this from a white man, because as if there wasn't, if only there was a 300-year black intellectual tradition of confronting America with the truth about racism. If only there was a Martin Luther King, a Malcolm X, a Stokely Carmichael, a Richard Wright, a C.L.R. James, a Claude McKay, a Langston Hughes, a Maya Angelou, a Ralph Ellison, a W.B. Du Bois, a Frederick motherfucking Douglass, that could have told us that America is this white supremacist country. But no, we needed John Griffin to say, yeah, it's true, it really is.
Oh, yes, and when you talk about Frederick Douglass, the most eloquent of ex-slaves in the modern world. And by eloquence, I mean what Cicero and Quintilian meant: wisdom speaking. And he did it in the face of what? In the face of what every black person in America for the last 400 years have had to come to terms with, which is a history of being terrorized, traumatized, and stigmatized. Isn't it something that in the face of terror, Douglass said, no, I don't want to create a black Al-Qaeda. I don't want to terrorize the folk who are terrorizing me. I don't want to gangsterize the folk who gangsterizing me in the face of terror. I want love, but justice is what love looks like in public. So I want justice, and I want justice for everybody. Everybody. What a tradition. What a grand people at our best.
Of course, what's really making me, and I think us, uneasy about this episode is not just the Black Like Me reference, but that it is digging deeper to blackface minstrelsy is what you can't not think of that with the final shot of Les in blackface. The huge thing that is lying under the surface of this episode is the blackface minstrel tradition in American culture.
Yeah.
And basically, for most of the 19th century, a huge part of American popular culture was people blacking up, whites corking their faces and pretending to be blacks, and then later blacks blacking up their faces and performing a kind of blackness. It's something that clearly makes us very uncomfortable today. The fact that they would do this on a sitcom in 1980 shows blackface. You know, the peak of the blackface minstrel show was the late 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
But as you said, it stayed in the culture for a long, long time. And it's really shockingly recently that we sort of decided this is no good. This is not okay anymore.
Yeah.
And there's been a remarkable sort of, cultural whitewashing, no pun intended, where this stuff, we've contrived to forget it.
Yeah.
And not that I was happy to see Les in blackface at the end of the episode, but neither do I think that the sort of collective amnesia that we've all decided to have about blackface, I'm not advocating for that either.
Well, I think that, let me give you a perfect example of that ambivalence, and it's fairly recent, and I think it's a good example. You've seen the Spike Lee movie Bamboozled, right?
Yes.
I think it's definitely sort of the outlier in Spike Lee's filmography. Nobody ever talks about it. It had to be released, I think, and it had a very, very limited release. Obviously, critics saw it. Critics were, as you might expect, divided. It's a satirical look at the entertainment industry around the end of the 90s, early aughts, when people like Spike Lee believed that stereotypical portrayals of Black Americans on networks like UPN were actively contributing to a continued minstrelsy in the pop culture. And so he takes it to its logical conclusion. And the producer played by Damon Wayans on this network proposes an actual minstrel show. And it becomes a huge hit among whites and blacks. And the idea that not only is white supremacy causing this, sort of epidemic of stereotyping, but also there's a little bit, I think, in Spike Lee's mind of sort of black complicity. It's like the stuff you talked about. Back in the day, black entertainers could only get on screen if they adhered to these minstrel show stereotypes. And he feels like nothing changed between the 1930s and the 2000s. It's all the same thing. He makes the blackface literal in order to accentuate the satire. I think it's a genius movie. It's incredibly uncomfortable to watch because the movie ends with this sequence of blackface routines from throughout motion picture and television history. And you just sit there in wide-eyed horror at how deeply integrated into American music, film, and pop culture it has been.
Yeah, absolutely. The movie Spike Lee makes you look at this, makes you confront it. And sure, so me as a, white liberal, I would have been a lot happier if Les didn't do the blackface in the end of this episode and I didn't have to think about this stuff.
Yeah.
But it would be easier to talk about blackface if we could just say it's pure white supremacy and now it's gone. But it's weird and complex in all sorts of ways. First, because it was just so huge and pervasive. Like so much of American culture, still owes roots to it.
When we look at jazz, blues, and rock and roll, they all come out of this tradition, basically.
And even things like country music seems like the whitest music around, but the music in the 19th century that sounds the most like country music is probably the, minstrel music.
Yeah.
If you want to know what the jokes, what the sort of tone of a 19th century minstrel show was, watch something like Hee Haw.
Hee Haw, yeah.
And just picture them in blackface, the kind of corn pone humor and mixed with the sort of sentimental songs.
Yeah.
But then just to complicate this even more, America's great cultural contributions come from racial mixing and racial stealing and borrowing and appropriation.
And I was going to say, in all of the positive and negative ways of that mixing. When cultures collide like that, there can be great things that come out of it and there can be awful things that come out.
In the 1990s, a historian named Eric Lott wrote a book about blackface minstrelsy called Love and Theft.
Yeah.
Bob Dylan actually used that as the title of an album after that. But, right there in the title, was Lott's argument, that blackface minstrelsy is both love and theft. In other words, yes, absolutely, white Americans were stealing culture from black Americans, and blackface is part of a process of ridiculing and dehumanizing, right? Like, they black up in order to police racial divides and dehumanize African Americans. And yet, there's clearly the fact that this is so powerful and so appealing to white audiences is that they want to be black. They want to appropriate black culture. And that's the love side of it. And Lott says that, that America celebrates the same culture it attempts to control and repress. And that blackface minstrelsy sort of embodies white supremacy and also disrupts racial hierarchies in weird, uncomfortable ways.
Yeah.
It's just not simple talking about this stuff and thinking about this stuff. As I say, it really was everywhere. And we've forgotten that, but why does Mickey Mouse wear white gloves?
I never even thought about it, but you're right. All those cartoon characters. God, that gets me thinking about Tom and Jerry, and the housekeeper character is, all the Song of the South. I mean, there's all these things that were from art. I mean, again, I can remember these from my childhood. They were still being aired in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, that's right. So the other thing is that this lasts longer than you think.
Yeah. Whew.
I like this. Give me more. Go on.
Yes.
Go on.
Now, I know you're familiar with minstrel shows.
Yes.
They came about in the 1840s.
Yes.
It was a variety show in which the talent was singing, dancing, telling jokes, doing skits, like in Living Color.
Right. That was dope.
Now, Mr. Dunwoody, I ask you, when was the last time there was a great variety show on the air? Carol Burnett?
Carol was balls.
Hee-haw?
Hee-haw was...
Keenan and Cal.
Yo, that's the stupidest shit on TV, yo.
So I say, let's take this form, this very American tradition of entertainment into the 21st century, the new millennium.
Okay, no. What's the name of the show? We need something that we could sell.
Man-Tan, the new millennium minstrel show.
Man-Tan, the new millennium. I really, really like this. You know how I know? I'm getting a boner. Huh?
Where do you come down in the end on what we should do with this stuff?
Right.
In other words, I started out by being upset that this was in WKRP, and I am upset because I think that this is like a loaded gun. You pick this up, you have to deal with it, and you can't just sort of grab a cheap ending laugh out of it.
Yeah.
But I'm also not completely comfortable with what seems to be the current way of dealing with it, which is just ignoring it, just forgetting it. Everyone agrees, we all agree that never happened.
So when I think about in childhood, especially in cartoons, being exposed to these kind of things, probably not fully understanding it for my age and not understanding the fraught history of the racism here. Am I glad that there's no longer Tom and Jerry and Bugs Bunny cartoons that have these horrible, examples of blackface and minstrelsy? I'm actually very happy about it. But I don't think we can throw them into the vaults forever. And I think it's important that people talk about it. And I think that it's important that it be talked about in a way, again, that isn't about white people's feelings about it and isn't about the white lens that we've seen and all the things we've talked about so far this episode. I think somebody like a Spike Lee, somebody like there's a museum in Big Rapids, Michigan of it's a museum of racially offensive toys and other bits of pop culture. In fact, that comes from Bamboozled. The Damon Wayans character collects these things after the minstrel show becomes a hit. If you sweep this stuff under the rug and you don't talk about it in a a sort of mature, I don't want to say academically minded character, but it's got to be kept alive for the simple reason that if we forget, we will relive it. We will revisit it. And I think that's...
Yeah. And you see, in the age of social media, of course, every year some pictures go viral of some, dumb white college kids.
There you go.
Blacking up. And, and it's a manifestation there of ignorance. And I mean ignorance in the literal sense that they don't know, they don't know what they're playing with. That's that's the charitable way to look at it.
Well, I was going to say, I find that as the years go on, I find that harder and harder to believe. But again, if the stuff is swept under the rug, people aren't going to know how truly offensive and historically irresponsible this kind of stuff is. And so maybe we are raising a generation now who doesn't realize how profoundly hurtful and how profoundly wrong doing this stuff is. Again, it's a complicated issue, but I think, again, ultimately, that not the responsibility, but I think that it's important that we view these artifacts through an African American lens, through a black lens, because if we don't, we risk putting our own spin on it as I'm speaking as a white American. My feelings about it ultimately aren't that important. You know what I mean? The feelings that come out of hundreds of years of oppression, those are important. I think they can be done responsibly. It's the same reason why, there's controversy about things like in Germany banning Mein Kampf and making it difficult for people to study this stuff. Does it end up recruiting more people than it ends up educating about the wrongness of it? It's a complicated issue. It definitely is.
Yeah, I agree that the most important perspective to hear from on these things is, the African-American perspective. I also think, though, that white people have to do the work of talking about this. Like, I wouldn't apologize for the fact that here we are, two white guys talking about this. It's just like men need to talk about sexism.
Right.
If we want to be woke, as they say today, if we want to stay woke, we got to do the work, too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard.
I guess what I'm saying is, like, I don't want some Gen Xer to say, oh, isn't it a shame they never show Tom and Jerry cartoons anymore?
Yeah.
Or isn't it a shame you can't buy Song of the South anymore? Well, maybe it is and maybe it isn't. I'm of the opinion that it's not a shame, but it's like treating these things. Is there a danger in treating these things like they're radioactive? Does that, I don't know. You have the danger of them gaining an allure, I guess. You know what I mean? That's a transgressive allure.
Radioactive, that's a good word for it. Sure. Okay, so let's make this concrete. You're doing programming for, Nick at Night or one of the, the rerun stations today.
Yeah.
You're running WKRP. Do you run this episode?
God, that's such a tough question. I don't know. Maybe you air it with something before and afterwards that talks about the stuff we've talked about. I mean, maybe not in as much detail, but I think context is so important. And like you were saying, if you divorce this stuff from the very complicated context, then you're doing a disservice on an educational level, I guess.
Yeah. My usual answer is that more history is better than less history.
Yeah.
So Nickelodeon, you have us on to talk before and after it, or better yet, get an African American intellectual. But
yes,
that'll solve everything.
Oof. Hey, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back again soon with more WKRP riffs and memories. If you like this enough to listen to the whole thing, tell somebody about it.
You can find us on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Facebook and Twitter, and at holdmyorderterribledresser.com, which wasn't taken. We always appreciate your clicks, your stars, your reviews, your comments, your tweets, your emails. Don't be strangers.
Good day, and may the good news be yours.
Baby, if you've ever wondered whatever became of me, I'm living on the air in Cincinnati, WKRP. I'm at WKRP in Cincinnati.
In a single year, he won Record, Album, and Song of the Year, and Best New Artist at the 1981 Grammys.
Sorry, the audio was going weird again.
That's fine. We could just leave that silent.